I am Denis Woulfe from the Longfellow and Nokomis Messenger, and I publish the Longfellow and Nokomis Messenger and the Midway Como North End Monitor, and I've been working in community newspapers for the last 30 years. I have an unusual position in that I'm responsible for both the editorial end of the two newspapers as well as the advertising end of the newspaper business, and that's not something that is a model for all the other media outlets in town, so it's somewhat unique. But I will say that working for a neighborhood newspaper is rewarding, in part because there's great variety to the work that you do in a given day. In my case, I'm responsible for assigning stories, working with reporters on developing the story, talking to sources, looking at the copy, and getting ready for production. I don't actually do the design work for the newspaper. That's handled by our graphic designer, but I do oversee the production and sign off on the paper before we send it off electronically. Meanwhile, during that same period of time for each of the newspapers, I'm also responsible for soliciting ads, contacting advertisers to updating their ad copy, and overseeing the production of the ads as well as other elements of production for each of the newspapers. So in the course of the day, I will be back and forth working on both papers, returning phone calls and emails and people pitching things to me, and so I will go back and forth from one side of the river to the next and one role to the other in working for each of the papers. So it is challenging though, just because even though we're monthly for each of the papers, it always seems like there's a deadline coming up of one nature or the other. So, but I do have some help in terms of freelance writers that work with us and submitting stories. Most of those are on assignment basis. Once in a while, someone will suggest stories to us, and periodically people from the community will offer guest pieces, op-ed pieces that we will consider to publish as well. And then, of course, freelance photographers that we might work with. And then I have some part-time ad person that helps solicit ads for each of the papers, since, especially in this day and age, you really can't devote enough time to soliciting ads. It's a pretty challenging market for newspapers of any kind. But somehow we've managed to survive over the years, and so we're still trying to reinvent ourselves like so many different businesses and media outlets today. Well, working for a neighborhood newspaper in an urban environment like St. Paul, Minneapolis, you really do focus on the stakeholders in your own community. So we do rely on the local churches, the businesses, the nonprofit organizations, and others to help define what the important stories are that we should be covering on a month-to-month basis. So even though there really isn't a board of advisors for each of the newspapers, I try to be as involved as I can be in each of the neighborhoods that we serve. For example, over in South Minneapolis, I'm pretty active in the Longfellow Business Association and will attend their monthly meetings. And whenever I do, I just did this week on Thursday, and Thursday's meeting was a legislative report from the legislators about what's happening at the Capitol, and not good news there, by the way. But I certainly get a sense from the politicos and business owners and the staff that run the local community groups, nonprofits, about what's happening, what we should be covering. They may check in with me about whether I would consider running a story about their organization or what they might do to promote a particular event coming up in the community. But there is that kind of organic check-in with those groups and organizations and the businesses that happens on a monthly basis. And like with the Longfellow Business Association, I'm always gratified and intrigued by attending those meetings because, unlike other business groups, I know when I go to those meetings that will be the owners and managers and presidents of those businesses that will be in attendance. So not just a paid staff person or representative or PR flack, it's actually the owner of the business. So I think it helps to keep it real and also provides an outlet for me as a neighborhood newspaper guy to keep in touch with the businesses and get a certain sense for what's important to them and where the community's at and how we should be covering the news and what stories are important that we should be publishing. In the Midway area, maybe just because of the hustle and bustle and University Avenue, and because there are so many large businesses and larger concerns, maybe it's easier to get lost, or when I go to a meeting there, maybe lost in the shuffle with bigger concerns. You know, now with light rail transit under construction on the University Avenue corridor, it's a huge concern, big issue. A lot of businesses that won't make it on University Avenue after the build-out is over 4 years from now. But it's a little different trying to be a force or a presence and involved in that issue because there are so many players, so many organizations and businesses that are involved in lobbying and reporting on it. Whereas in Longfellow and Nokomis, when I'm here and involved in meetings and talking to people, there is more of a sense of being in a small town. You know, I'll have lunch down at the rail station bar grill, Minneapolis, on 38th here, periodically or once a month. And invariably, when I do, I'll bump into my advertisers, you know, having lunch at the table next door. And so I know that in addition to seeing the manager of the rail station, conversing with him, and we kind of exchange pleasantries about the last LBA meeting or what's happening in the area. I'll also, you know, see some of my advertisers and can kind of connect with them. So it is different. It is very, I think, gratifying that small town feel is reinforced, I think, in the community like Longfellow. And also, you can see how the stakeholders, whether it's the businesses or churches or other nonprofit entities, have influence because you can kind of see where it happens and you can see how they network with one another, and it does have an impact on what the outcome is, you know, to a political issue or otherwise. In fact, last month we were approached by former representative, State Representative Wes Scotland, about doing a story before the Nokomis Library had reopened. They've been under renovation and were about to reopen their doors on April 30th. And so he approached us about writing a story. Well, he knew we'd do a story on the library reopening, and he said, what a perfect time to do a story about the community dialogue that had been ensuing over the years about the need for a crosswalk or a four-way stop in front of the library so kids and other pedestrians could cross over this busy street. And so we agreed to do it, and interestingly, even though this had been hotly debated for many years, within a few days of our article coming out, the city installed a four-way stop there. And so he called us to thank us and said, wow, your paper is really widely read in the neighborhood. And he said, miraculously, after the story came out, somebody down at City Hall said, you know, we need to have something done about this. So anyway, that was very gratifying. And also, you know, it was just further reinforcement that, you know, what we do and the part that we play in the community fabric, it really does make a difference. You know, I think there are a lot of things that the daily papers don't or won't cover because they may not have the sex appeal or the same graphic pull that some of the stories that we might entertain. We do cover a lot of stories that relate to the district councils, the community organizations in each of the cities, and a lot of times those are the things that the daily papers really aren't that interested in because they don't sell papers, as we might say. But for us, I think there are many times that I'll talk to a reader that will call and thank us for being there, for covering certain things, because they know when they pick up the daily papers that for the most case they're going to see more national and regional news and other news about the metro area, but it's not going to be the same kind of news about what's happening to the church down the street from where they live, or a neighbor with an unusual hobby, or things that don't have the same headline pull that the new Viking Stadium might have as a draw, but still, as a resident of the neighborhood, the things that they think are important and they need to know about. So, crime is one of those issues it's always been a debated subject over the years, because I'll have a lot of residents who are very passionate about the idea that their neighborhood newspaper shouldn't be running stories that cover the violence and the stories about the shootings that they might see covered in the daily papers. So some residents will offer that, well, I don't want to see that in my neighborhood newspaper. That's not what I think should be in the paper. And I think part of that is because there's always that measure of pride about the neighborhood where someone lives, and I think sometimes, particularly in an urban environment, residents think that the daily papers pick on maybe their neighborhood and pull up the headlines that are, they think, sensationalized or overplayed to try to get readers. And so it's always a balancing act, but at the same time, while I certainly respect that sentiment from readers, I also think that readers need to know what's happening down the street or at Longfellow Park, or whether they can feel safe outdoors, or what's been happening in the neighborhood, so that they can take the proper precautions. So, and we try not to sensationalize that information, but at the same time, I think we feel strongly that people should know what's happening and be informed, protect themselves, and also know who to call to get more information as a story evolves, because no matter what we're reporting on, whether it's a shooting in Longfellow as the one that occurred last month or something else, the story is always evolving, it's always changing. It's always hard to be up to date with the monthly paper, because no matter what you publish in a given month, something else is going to happen the day after you deliver that paper. Being in community journalism, I guess I've just seen that it is vital information that people need to know, and hearing from readers and businesses too that it's an important conduit and a corridor for people to get information about what's happening in the neighborhood, and also as a sounding board so they can offer their input out there, so that people understand what their perspective is from as a resident or a business owner in the area. So it's an important two-way communications vehicle, I think, for community stakeholders.